On this episode of Death Row Stories,
shooting and robbing the newspaper man is senseless crime.
They was killing people for that.
a young man is arrested in the Deep South.
I've never met a criminal in my life that was guilty.
Marlon Howell shot that guy, no doubt.
But when evidence of innocence emerges,
there was so much lying.
A perfect storm of ignorance and deceit.
The state's case unravels.
Whatever you put up on my child, you put it up on me.
Why are you so hell-bent on trying to kill me?
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered.
Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
New Albany, Mississippi is a quiet, close-knit community located just south of the Tennessee border. At 5 in the morning on May 15th, 2000, the tranquility of this peaceful town was shattered.
Got a shooting at 203 Broad Street. Is the subject still out there that done the shooting? No, black subject, about 6 foot tall. Black subject, 6 foot tall? Early 20s, 2 people in the car. They're driving a late model Oldsmobile.
Just prior to daylight, I received a call from our dispatch center that there'd been a shooting on the north side of New Albany. And when I arrived on the scene, I noticed there was a vehicle that had run off the street and actually hit a car parked in a driveway.
Inside the car, police found 61-year-old newspaper carrier David Pernell shot in the chest.
You could tell the gunshot wound was at a close range. There was some money strewn in the floorboard of the car. I thought this was probably a robbery attempt. We got extremely lucky that there was a neighbor that was up in his kitchen drinking coffee and saw what had transpired on the street in front of his house.
Got up this morning and I heard the horns blowing and looked out my window and saw 2 cars stopped right here in my front yard. And a passenger from the rear car came out and shot the fellow in the front seat. Raised his arms, lowered his arms, pulled a pistol out and shot him.
Eyewitness Charles Rice called 911 and reported the shooter as a young African-American man.
People were just shocked, totally shocked. Homicides are very unusual here.
Most people here know each other, and especially Mr. Pernell. You know, he had worked at the post office 40 years till he retired. It just kind of staggered us as a community.
There will be justice. It will. There will be. I believe in the system, and it's just hard to comprehend at a time like this.
Less than 12 hours after the murder, 19-year-old Curtis Lippy and 18-year-old Adam Ray walked into the New Albany police station ready to confess.
I said, "Now, Curtis, I've known you since you were a kid, and I don't want you to sit here and lie to me. I just want you to tell me the truth." He said, "Well, Mr. Ken, I'm not going to lie to you. Marlon shot that guy, and me and Adam saw it."
Lippy and Ray said they'd driven around the night before with 20-year-old Marlon Howell, and that Marlon had pulled the trigger.
I knew that both of them were very scared of Marlon.
We had Marlon on a previous narcotics violation. We placed him under arrest. And when we interrogated Marlon, he was nervous. He didn't want to make a statement, didn't want to say anything.
And, of course, I asked him, "Where were you last night?" And it was with a girl. He would never tell us who she was, but he's very evasive at that point. He said, "I just don't remember her name."
When you're dealing with a case of this magnitude, you want all the evidence you can get. So we had decided to put Mr. Howell in a lineup to see if Mr. Rice could identify him.
You know, as soon as Marlon came through, Charles Rice picked him out like that.
Curtis Lippy and Adam Ray pleaded guilty to manslaughter and were both sentenced to 30 years in prison. Marlon Howell would face the death penalty.
I knew Marlon's father, and he called me about Marlon and the charges against him. Co-defendants were cutting a deal to keep from getting the death penalty. There was never an offer on Marlon to plead guilty. I thought he needed help.
Marlon's trial began on March 21st, 2001. District Attorney Jim Hood would prosecute the case.
Anybody who has ever had to face Jim Hood as district attorney knows he's a fighting DA. He is going to do whatever it takes to get a conviction.
Jim Hood presented damning testimony from Curtis Lippy, who said he and Adam picked up Marlon Howell at 11 p.m. After a long night of drinking and smoking marijuana, they came upon David Pernell at 5 a.m., and Marlon shot him.
Mr. Rice said he only saw 2 people in the car. And according to Ray and Lippy, there's 3 in the car. If there was anybody present, it was Ray and Lippy.
The defense argued that Marlon had left Ray and Lippy earlier in the evening and was miles away when the shooting occurred.
Marlon was at home at that time, and his dad and sister both said they heard him coming in the house, but they didn't see him.
Marlon would always come home right at 2:30, somewhere in that. That particular night, I could hear the refrigerator opening. And then he'd watch TV till he fall asleep.
For your family to think you're innocent, I mean, that's only natural. The hardest people to convince of guilt is mom and daddy. Mr. Rice was 100% positive that Marlon Howell was the shooter.
The jury's decision was unanimous. Death by lethal injection.
The way to get away with something is for you to do it and go straight to the police and say that guy did it. Because whoever get to the police first get to go home. So you pick Marlon as the fall guy. And we ain't never seen no proof that he did this.
A person was asked on stand, do he think I could get a fair trial in New Albany? And his exact words were they think that we should take him out to that tree and hang him. Everybody had their heart set on finding me guilty of killing Mr. Pernell. I knew I didn't have a fighting chance.
Marlon Howell arrived on death row in Parchman, Mississippi on March 31st, 2001. It was the day before his 21st birthday.
They brought me to a cell that a guy that had a real bad mental disease was in. And so it was a lot of writing on the walls, a lot of filth. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to communicate with anybody.
The cell that they got him housed in is not fit for any human. It's very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. When I go and visit Marlon, I make it a fun time. I do my little fanfare dance, and that just tickles him.
Marlon was raised the youngest of 4 children. He was popular in school and a natural athlete.
He was just in his zone when he played football, to the point Mississippi State wanted him to come to one of their camps. I wanted him to be my pro. That's what I thought it was leading up to.
He had all the girls, man. That's how I used to kick it with him all the time. We dated white girls, you know, like a lot. It's frowned upon in Mississippi. A lot of people believe that white people should be with white people, black people should be with black people. We didn't care, we'd be out with them.
Dating white women in New Albany drew unwanted attention to Marlon.
In the generations I grew up in, we never really put a stigma on interracial dating. But the older people, of course, when they find out, some of the teachers or some of the kids' parents, they raised pretty hell about it.
I was concerned back then when I came to, they was killing people for that. And of course, Marlon said, "Oh, Daddy, you old school. It ain't like that now." But a person could just smile in your face and easily come back and try to do something to you for that.
The cops harassed us all the time. They pull up, grab you, search you, make you take your shoes off.
In the fall of 1997, Marlon was approached by a man and woman looking to buy marijuana.
A guy asked me if I knew I could get some because the female that was in the car with him wanted to party. She was a very attractive white female. And so I got them around $15 worth of marijuana.
The following week, Marlon was called to the principal's office.
I kind of had an eerie feeling that when I walked in the principal's office, 2 officers strip searched me, put me in handcuffs, and escorted me out to school.
Marlon had been the target of an undercover police officer. Now 17, he was facing felony drug charges.
They gave me a year of house arrest and 2 years supervised probation. I was a kid and I was avoiding going to prison. I never got a chance to graduate.
We told him, that he needed to turn his life around, but he still wanted to hang with his friends.
On the night of the murder, Marlon was walking to a relative's house when a car pulled up alongside him.
It was about 10 or 11 o'clock, and I seen his car pull up, and I didn't have anything to do, so I jumped in the car. Adam Ray, Curtis Lippy had been drinking, and I noticed that Curtis was intoxicated.
At one point, Marlon says Adam retrieved a gun and handed it to Curtis.
Curtis had pulled the chamber back, and I didn't know if the gun had a bullet in it or not. And I remember snatching the pistol out of his hand and told Adam to put the pistol in the glove compartment. So I was like, man, I gotta get the hell away from these guys. They ended up dropping me off back at the spot where they picked me up at. I never was with Adam or Curtis when any shots was fired at anybody.
Just 3 hours after David Pernell was killed, Marlon appeared in court with his father for a hearing about his probation fees.
If you killed a good old boy, so to speak, in New Albany, you a little black young child, you better run and hide and run quick. And Marlon, he didn't do any of that.
You had to believe that a young black man killed a white man, and a couple of hours later, going to return to the courthouse. I don't believe that.
Jim Hood had raised Marlon's probation fees at his murder trial, arguing that Marlon was a local kingpin who robbed Pernell in order to pay the fees from his drug arrest.
Jim Hood tried to convince the jury that Marlon's the head guy here and that all the other people involved are just following Marlon. And so they came up with a motive or reason, but they never presented any proof, in my opinion, that Marlon actually tried to commit a robbery. Somebody's got to be held responsible. So Marlon was the only guy that they could hold responsible.
With Marlon now on death row, his family was determined to get him a new trial.
It was during one visitation that I was there with Marlon. He said, "Mama, I will never get out of this place unless you all find me an out-of-state attorney." I said, "Okay," but on the inside I was saying, we can't afford that, you know? And I got home that day, and my oldest daughter called me. She said, "I found Marlon an attorney. His name is Billy Richardson."
Defense attorney Billy Richardson rose to prominence after freeing a man from death row in North Carolina.
Marlon's sister called my office. This particular time, my daughter was working with me, and she took the call. She woke me up at 5 in the morning and says, "I want you to stand in the den, and I'm gonna go out on the street, and I want you to see if you can distinguish my features." So she went out on the street, and being honest, I could not distinguish her features, and she was my daughter. She said, "Dad, there's a case in Mississippi I want you to look at, where the only evidence was this eyewitness." Well, you can't see what he says he saw at that time. And so I started looking at the other evidence in the case, and nothing added up.
We always thought that if the police picked you up, then you were guilty, until our eyes came open to the truth about how the law operates and how cruel and underhanded they could be.
3 years after Marlon Howell landed on Mississippi's death row, defense attorney Billy Richardson took on his case free of charge.
The only evidence really against Marlon was this eyewitness that looked out his window at 5 in the morning. So we hired one of the foremost experts in the country on cross-racial identification and on lighting. We asked the neighbors to turn all the porch lights on. We made sure all the street lights were working.
Chuck Mims, a former police chief, was Billy's investigator on the case.
It's a considerable distance out to the center of the street from inside the house. There are shrubs in front of the house. The person standing out the street, other than the fact that I knew them, I couldn't even have told you if they had a pair of glasses on.
And the expert said it was humanly impossible for the eyewitness to pick out Marlon on that one encounter.
I mean, there's no question it was dark when this crime happened. The lighting was good enough that you could see what happened on the street. Plus, you had the car lights. You've got to remember that. I was confident in my mind that Mr. Rice could identify someone at that car.
Billy decided to take a closer look at eyewitness Charles Rice.
One of the basic things a defense attorney's got to do when there's no physical evidence in the case and it's all based on eyewitness identification is to do a basic background investigation on the eyewitness. That wasn't done in this case.
And we found several felony crimes that Charles Rice was charged and convicted with.
The jury, in weighing Rice's credibility, needed to know that the witness that they were relying on was sentenced to prison for breaking in people's homes and stealing their guns. And while he was in prison, he was a member of a white supremacist group.
Charles Rice was presented as a model citizen, so they didn't have any reason not to believe him.
You know, in criminal trials, unfortunately, you don't have many preachers and Sunday school teachers as witnesses. If it hadn't been for Mr. Rice, it would have been much more difficult.
I felt it odd that they did a live lineup with Marlon. In my entire career, I've never known but 1 or 2 live lineups.
I am a retired police chief with approximately 32 years of service. As a police officer, you're trained. Every participant in the lineup needs to be relatively the same. You don't want to make anyone stand out in the lineup, particularly your suspect.
When you look at it, you have a short man, Marlon, who's 6'2", short man. In prison, you have orange flip-flops. You have orange flip-flops. Marlon, they make Marlon take his orange flip-flops off and put tennis shoes on.
It makes you look at him. And even if you're not sure anymore, it's easy to say, oh, that's the one that did it. Why would you do that? Did you not know better, or did you intentionally do it?
Were you aware at the time that Marlon was wearing a different set of shoes than everybody else in the lineup?
I was not aware at the time.
Do you think that could have influenced Mr. Rice in some way to pick up Marlon?
I would, if he saw his feet. I'm not sure he could see his feet from where he was standing.
But if he could?
If he could, I mean, naturally, I would think.
I don't think they thought Rice could pick him out. They made it easy for him. They made it real easy for him.
If Billy could prove eyewitness Charles Rice didn't clearly see the shooter, and that his identification had been influenced, the courts would have to consider granting Marlon a new trial.
I wanted to question Rice, and the minute I met him, you could tell he was struggling with this. And I showed him the light measurements, and I said, do you honestly believe you saw what you saw that night? And then out of the blue, he goes, you know, I do have doubts about this. And that's when I said, are you willing to sign an affidavit?
Now, before you sign this, look me in the eye. Tell me I have not coerced you.
You have not coerced me.
Do you have a substantial reason to doubt about your identification?
Yes.
Okay. And you're comfortable signing this?
Yes.
Okay. Because you're the one that's got to
sleep with it.
With Rice's recantation, Billy had struck a major blow to the prosecution's case. But Marlon still needed to figure out why Curtis Lippy and Adam Ray had fingered him as the shooter.
I done been interrogated, pressured and threatened, and they told me, that I am gonna do some time, but, they could cut me a break by telling them, giving them names and stuff like that.
In the summer of 2005, Billy Richardson had his first breakthrough when star witness Charles Rice reversed his testimony. This left the statements of Curtis Lippy and Adam Ray as the only remaining evidence against Marlon. After serving 17 years in prison, Adam Ray was paroled in 2018.
I just heard a gunshot, and then when I heard the gunshot, I left the scene and went home. At first, they tried to blame it on Lippy and me, that Lippy was the one that got out and did the killing. And then they changed it up and said it was me and Lippy. We never got out of the car, period. Lippy was in the backseat asleep. Both of us was intoxicated. Marlon had got out to talk to a friend of his or somebody. I'm not paying attention, I'm playing with the radio. I can't say that you killed somebody if I didn't witness it, if I didn't see you get out with a gun, walk up to a car and shoot him. They told me I was gonna get life or death, and that if I plead out, I would get 20 years. You facing life or death, and then that right there, my heart started beating real hard.
Though Adam Ray admitted he only named Marlon to avoid the death penalty, Billy did not believe he was telling the complete truth.
It's their gun, it's their car. Co-defendants like that are in deep trouble and know they're in deep trouble will do anything they can to please the prosecutor, including tell lies.
Charles Rice had reported seeing only 2 people in the getaway car. Billy visited Curtis Lipsy in prison for more answers.
The first statement that you signed angered the officers. Yeah, they tore it up. And told you were going to get death or life if you didn't cooperate. This don't have a gang that is laid. I really do not know whose gang it is. I did not see a gun on this shooting.
Ray and Lipsy said they wrote statements, and both of those statements don't even mention Marlon in them. For some reason, Tim Kent and Chief Grisham decided that those statements were unreliable. Now, the last I checked, that's evidence. The prior inconsistent statements go directly to the truthfulness of a witness.
They sure weren't pressured in my presence, and I don't think they were pressured in Investigator Kent's presence either. I think their statements were strictly voluntary.
In 2013, Billy's discoveries swayed the court to reconsider Marlon's case. At the circuit court, Marlon received a hearing to determine if he deserved a new trial.
We raised about 50 issues. They gave us a hearing on 3.
Patsy Brumfield covered the proceeding for the Daily Journal.
Jim Hood, as the Attorney General for the state of Mississippi, had returned in glory to prosecute a case that he was proud of so that everybody would know he was still the man.
Jim Hood is a formidable opponent. It was very apparent to me that we had an uphill battle. When Rice testified, he recants the recantation. And he said, at first I intentionally lied when I signed your affidavit because I was just trying to get rid of you. Well, if that's the case, why wouldn't you just say, get the heck out of my house?
Defense investigator Chuck Mims watched the testimony from the back of the courtroom.
Billy's going at Rice, and they're really having a pretty heavy exchange. And the judge finally stopped and said, what are you attempting to do?
I said, well, Your Honor, he's basically saying that, he was coerced. I'm challenging his credibility. And the judge, on the record, said, you've already proven he's a liar. What more do you need to prove?
Billy also questioned Police Chief David Grisham about how he'd conducted the lineup.
The live lineup's a critical stage in the proceeding. So if they're going to do a live lineup, there had to be a lawyer there.
David Grisham, the chief of police, testified there was an attorney present, and he named an attorney by the name of Reagan Russell as that attorney.
And I said, let's ask Mr. Russell why in the world he did not object to that lineup. He goes, what are you talking about? I've never represented anybody in the live lineup in my life.
I never testified that I was absolutely 100% sure that his lawyer was at the lineup, but that I thought he was. You wouldn't be required to furnish the defendant an attorney if he had not been arrested and officially charged. Marlon wasn't formally charged with capital murder until after the lineup.
There are 5 different places where it's clearly shown that Marlon was under arrest for capital murder. Well, if that's not evidence of being under arrest for capital murder, I don't know what is.
I've not seen capital cases like that where there was so much lying, and you wondered if anybody had told the truth about anything.
As Marlon's hearing ended, a new witness was about to come forward.
I was there to sort of live blog what was going on in court. People would watch this on their computer as it happened and unfolded.
And then all of a sudden, she gives me the motion, come over here. And I walk over, she said, read this.
A woman commented at the end of one of my website posts about the hearing.
I look at the screen, and the screen says, as God is my witness, Marlon Howell did not do this. I took him home that night. The first time I met Marlon, I said, Marlon, I'm sure you're going to tell me you're not guilty. Where were you if you weren't at that murder? Where were you? And his answer was, I was with a girl. Okay, who was she? He said, I will tell you, honestly, I'd been smoking marijuana and I don't remember.
On the last day of Marlon's hearing, Mims came across a comment posted online from a woman who claimed she was with Marlon the night of the shooting.
She said, Marlon Howell did not commit this crime. I took him home that night. And it had the name Lasagna Gambles with it. And within 5 minutes, I had Lasagna Gambles on the telephone in South Carolina. And she said, he called my house. I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning.
This is the 18th of April in Summerville, South Carolina, interview with Miss Lasagna Renee Gambles. Do you know about what time you left Blue Mountain to go into New Albany?
Probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock that morning, probably earlier.
Okay. When you picked him up, where did you go?
I went to New Albany on the north side. It's a store called Be Quick. That's why I picked him up.
Do you know about what time you got him to his house?
We probably got there almost 3 o'clock, if not before.
Lasagna's testimony matched the alibi from Marlon's family, who insisted he arrived home before the 5 a.m. shooting.
And when he called me, I was just trying to help a friend out. And then when it happened, you know, I felt like I needed to say something, but I was advised not to say anything.
Who advised you?
One of the police officers in New Albany came to my school and told me not to say a damn thing.
Why haven't you told anyone before
because
now?
I was afraid. They were going to try to pin something on me.
And she told me she was pregnant at the time, an 18-year-old black girl in New Albany, Mississippi, pregnant, getting told by a white police officer, you better not tell anybody. She was scared to death.
Why now?
I got to get it off my chest. And I've prayed on this for a long time because it's just not right. You can't do anybody just like that. He's missed out on so much.
In hindsight, I know that I should have told him, but one of the main reasons why I never told anybody about Lasagna was because I was afraid for her life and the life of her family. I knew that she had got intimidated. Everybody that was a witness for me has been intimidated. Yeah, I have reached out to her a few times since I've been incarcerated. She never responded. And I honestly felt that she don't want to be involved in my case. She's real brave that she took the initiative.
Billy Richardson felt that if a jury had heard Lasagna's testimony, Marlon would never have been convicted. In a last-ditch effort, Billy requested that the judge consider Lasagna as confirmation of Marlon's alibi.
Judicial candidates in the state of Mississippi, all the way from the bottom to the top, are elected. On the ballot, it says nonpartisan. That is a dream. Almost everybody understands they do come with partisan opinions, desires, affiliations. And Judge Richardson was pretty much known as kind of the hanging judge. He has a propensity to support the prosecution.
There's always this hope in me that the judge will do the right thing. I don't think the judge did the right thing in this case.
Judge Richardson ruled that despite irregularities with the lineup, Charles Rice's identification of Marlon was credible. He declined to hear Lasagna's testimony, and the Mississippi Supreme Court ruled it was too late to be considered as new evidence. Marlon's request for a new trial was denied.
It's beyond the pale that you would put a man to death on this type of evidence. How can you have justice?
Well, I thought that I would be able to prove my innocence. Why are you so hell-bent on trying to kill me?
Justice demands a rigorous examination of the facts of the case before you take a person's liberty or life. And you have in this case essentially no credible evidence whatsoever that Marlon committed this crime.
For more than a decade, Billy Richardson has been fighting to prove Marlon's innocence. But with all state appeals having been exhausted, Marlon's last chance lies with the federal courts.
I deserve a new trial, and I pray that they give me a new trial. The court is telling me this, Mr. Howell, it doesn't matter. What evidence you bring to us, we just gonna say to hell with your constitutional right.
In 2015, a group of federal public defenders took over Marlon's case. Their sweeping petition argues that the entire basis of the state's case against Marlon has been unlawful.
The police reached a conclusion and they pointed everything towards that conclusion instead of trying to prove or disprove what they were told.
I don't think it was a robbery. I think it was two high crazy people acting the fool. And I think they honestly thought that gun wouldn't fire.
Former lead investigator Tim Kent is now the mayor of New Albany and stands by the investigation.
Sometimes there's not much evidence. And I thought, well, if I would have been innocent and I walked in here and them two guys have told on me, I sure wouldn't sit here and not say anything. You know, I would have said they're lying. Everybody was the same agreement that Marlon did it, there's no doubt.
Once you write it up, everybody gonna support whatever you wrote up. Everybody gonna sign on to it. They gonna make it true. Nobody questions.
Marlon Howell had choices to make. There were a lot of choices that were made between that drug charge and Mr. Pernell dying. There were a lot of decisions, bad decisions that were made.
I feel like I let a lot of people down. I wish that a lot of decisions, dumb decisions that I made when I was a teenager, I never would have made them. I regret that I did get into the car with those individuals that night. Being on death row is a life within itself. I have marks on my wrist from being in handcuffs for 18 years. It's hard, man, when you know that you're not the same anymore. I feel condemned.
I am a believer in the death penalty, and for that crime, I believe he deserves it. Justice has been done.
You know, they say that justice is blind. Well, sometimes justice is blindsided, and it's blindsided by what I call a perfect storm of ignorance, willful neglect, and intentional deceit. And in this case, you have all three. And it just made for a combination where an innocent person who's sitting on death row for 18 years is being railroaded.
You nailed me to the cross as well. And I may not ever get healed, but I'm hoping and praying that my child will one day walk through these doors before I leave this world. Walk back inside this house and pick me up and swing me around like he normally do. One day. One day.